Fala, turma! Estamos aqui muito felizes com mais um episódio do nosso Garagem do Silício. Eu sou o Gustavo Fuga, o host desse papo incrível. E daqui a pouquinho, na verdade agora, a gente já vai trocar para o inglês, porque temos um convidado incrível aqui that I'd like to introduce. So now switching to English, and I'd like to introduce our colleague and friend, Hap. It's such a great pleasure to have you here.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for putting me on this podcast.
Yeah, it's so fun. Hap was recently in Brazil, right?
Yeah.
When was that?
That was in the fall, late fall.
Cool.
So I was there for a few days, did a lot of presentations and met a lot of people.
Wow,
A
cool.
lot of fun.
Just São Paulo or
Just in Sao Paulo.
Okay.
And then I was also in Chile because I advise a company in Santiago.
Oh, really?
And it's a company that's making a replacement for leather out of mycelium, the root structure of mushrooms. So they go on expeditions into the Patagonia or the Amazon.
That's fantastic.
They come up with new species, hundreds of thousands of species of mycelium. And then you can take them back to the lab. When you take them back to the lab, you make sheets of material. And sure, you can make anything out of it, food, pharma, whatever. They've focused on leather because leather is an environmentally very damaging product. It takes 3 years to grow the cattle to the right size. Then 30% of the hide is wasted because there's imperfections in it. While the cattle are growing, they put methane in the air. Then, after they finally get the hide, then they use chromium to tan it, ruins the water. This product can be made in 10 days.
Yeah.
And so you can do it without the chromium tanning associated with it. So from an environmental standpoint, it's very attractive. The other one is it comes up with a way to support the indigenous cultures that exist there. The indigenous cultures are being decimated and kicked out primarily because of economics. You need the land for the cattle, or you need to have the toothpicks or whatever you want to make out of it. But this is a way that they have a foundation they've set up to try and give back, and they're trying to not only make money from their company, but bring others in to be able to protect these cultures. And of course, they're protecting thousands of years of knowledge. And when you take this technology into things like pharma and food, that knowledge could be incredibly beneficial. And it's eradicated the moment they're gone. Wow. And so anyway, so I was there working on that as well. So I kind of combined the two because I live in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And it's a few thousand miles away to go south. So I decided I'd combine those two activities.
Wow, sounds like a lot of fun. And that was in Santiago, right?
That was in Santiago.
Cool. And
then we went up to the mountains to have a team bonding, and it was good because it was a helicopter lodge.
Wow.
And although the proprietor there said, I'd love to do everything for you. And I said, well, how about getting us on the helicopter? Wow. I said, well, that's difficult to do. Well, it turns out the ski guys were there. One of them, all of them were North Face athletes. Oh. And so I started talking to them about North Face, and by the morning we were on the helicopter.
Of course. Such a great story. And of course, we're going to go a little deep on North Face story and all your success. We know you're a serial entrepreneur, you're a professor, consultant. But we were just now talking about failure and how important is that. So I think the most interesting way to start this conversation, instead of talking of 60 years of successes and great stories that we're gonna talk about, if you could start with a failure to actually to help us to set the tone of how actually the Silicon Valley is built not only over success but also failure, right?
For sure, and I'm a big proponent of it.
Yeah,
I try to preach it wherever I go, because in many parts of the world, and Brazil is one of those places, that failure is looked as sort of a damaging thing or a horrible thing, or it's difficult to get financing after you do it. The reality is that because of the heritage here, coming all the way from when this area was founded by risk-taking gold diggers, people trying to find the mines, that mentality has been, it's okay to try if you don't get there. The big idea that comes from that is, when it's okay to fail, it is also okay to set up really outside goals. The easiest way not to fail is to set very modest goals. So we're going to grow 7% a year or whatever. I mean, it's basically inflation, right?
Yep.
But you won't fail. When it's okay to fail, because you can bounce back, even if you know that the probability of failure, because it is with entrepreneurship, 80% of entrepreneurial activities fail, but it's okay not only to start, but set these high goals. And so there's banks set up here that will loan to people not against their fixed assets, but against their prospects, taking warrants or whatever.
Yeah.
There are law firms and accounting firms that will work on options or warrants so that instead of saying, well, I'm going to start low and I'm going to take my sister-in-law or my brother who's an accountant or is a lawyer in the local area, and you take them until you can afford a little bit more, and then you step up, and then if you finally get to IPO, you have to go to the sophisticated firm. Each time you take those steps, you have a hiccup. In accounting, for example,
Yep.
you have to have somebody who's been with you for 2 years in accounting to be able to do it. Well, here you've got all of that embedded in the culture, and the banks will loan to you if you failed, assuming you learned from it. And so many of the best names in Silicon Valley, as I was mentioned to you before we came on, many of the best names have failed. Steve Jobs, Mark Andreessen, Jack Dorsey, go on and on. And these people failed for different reasons. You know, in the case of Steve Jobs, I mean, he was an insufferable person, driven, but he didn't know how to work with people. You know, in the case of Andreessen, it was more about his strategy was that he really wanted to do things his way, sue Microsoft and whatever, and his board said we can't afford that. In the case of Dorsey, it was more about thinking that if you go really fast, all your problems are going to go away. Well, you go really fast, you have another set of problems you have to deal with, like money and whatever. And so I try and encourage people to do that and let them know that the banks will fund you. Investors, we have a lot of angel investors here who've been through that process. Banks will do that, and the idea is not to be paralyzed by the fact that you might fail, because I said 80% of the companies do fail. But if you know it's 80%, nobody in their right mind is going to start a business. But look at this. I mean, we are entrepreneurs. When you have that fail-safe thing, then it's okay if I fail. It's okay. I'm probably, in today's world, not any of the people your age and younger are not going to work for one organization their whole career.
That's true.
You know, when I started, people thought about that, although most of them end up working with 2 or 3. But really, the reality was everybody was thinking that that it was going to be I'll get a gold watch and I'll retire. Well, the things that are working against that. The first one is we're living longer.
Yeah.
So anybody born today is expected to live to 100. The social security systems that exist are not predicated on people living to be 100. So just by theory, you're going to have to work longer. The second thing is this pace of change of society is getting so fast that organizations don't live as long as they did. Some do. But it's getting short.
Merge, they acquire,
right. And when that happens, many people leave.
Yeah.
And they leave either because they don't like the way things are going, or
the cultural
the
shock.
culture's changed, time's over,
Yeah.
and they're going to move on. But once you know you're going to move on, but it's okay, you can get funding and do that. It's there. So that's embedded in this area in Silicon Valley, and people just believe it.
That's so awesome.
And they don't ask you, what company you're with. They ask you which companies have you been with, or what are you working on now.
That's so powerful. Do you think this is connected with the fake it until make it in a way?
Oh, sure. Ultimately, nobody would, in my experience, nobody would be an entrepreneur unless they didn't have some examples of people that did that and did really well. I mean, the idea of starting a business and putting up with all the headaches and the work-life balance that you have and all
or
those
don't
things,
have, right?
is pretty daunting.
Yeah.
If you don't have some North Star, some view at the end of, wow, this could really pay off. And the payoff can be psychic as well as economic. I mean, everybody talks about the economic because that's a KPI that's easy to measure.
Yeah.
But this idea of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When you build a business, you're not at the beginning, you're worried about the economics and whether you can survive and whether you're going to have enough food for the family. But you start moving up that hierarchy, and you start getting to a point where, what are you really trying to do with attenuating yourself, being the most you can be, getting your ideas, the concept of changing the world, and really making a profound difference. All those things are the great rewards that come from the probability that you're going to succeed.
That's true. But do you think, how do you do that in a big company? Like, I mean, managing failure in the beginning, it's more like a cultural thing. that comes from the founder, but in a big company, like imagine like the North Face, like hundreds of employees, a lot of, how do you set the incentives for the leadership to actually also think like the founder, like the founder mode that people are all saying here? So.
Well, it's a big question. And if you're brought into a company to change them, you're doing change management and try to instill that culture, it's much harder.
Yeah. Okay.
One, because you have maybe 1,000 employees or whatever, and each person has to be influenced that way. And it takes a long time to do that.
To shift a little.
So if you're starting your own company, it's much easier because you say this is a standard, and then you kind of let people self-select around you, and the people buy off kind of do it, and you have changeover and whatever, but you set it from the beginning. Doesn't mean that you can't do it in the larger one, but it's easier to do when you're there.
But in your case, sorry, like during this 20-year journey, like you set right since the beginning, and then was more like maintaining the culture alive.
But you have to watch that you don't criticize ideas or criticize somebody for failing.
Okay.
Now, what you have to do from a strict business standpoint is you need to delegate to people, to give them the responsibility and authority to do something as if they're their own entrepreneur. But you don't want to risk the entire company while you're finding out if somebody's capable of doing it. So the easy way to do that, first of all, the 80-20 rule, which you're probably familiar with, the Pareto principle, but that applies to virtually all business. And 80% of your results are going to go from 20% of your items. So if you're going to delegate, what you do is you say you have 10 people you're working with, you delegate that 80% that doesn't make the 20% difference, and you focus on the 20%. That's what you watch. But then you do each one of those, and if you have 80%, each person has 8%. If somebody totally failed, which is not going to happen. It's a question of degrees. But if somebody totally failed, it'd be okay. And the others are developing their skills while they're going through. Right. I have one technique which I use in the companies I consult with, and I did at North Face all the time. And it's what I called possibility thinking. Okay. And that was that I had a rule that for the first, and usually I didn't want my meetings to be more than an hour because I thought they lost some of their zest at that time. But in the first 15 minutes of that meeting, nobody can say no to any idea. And the reason to do that is a lot of the good ideas come from people that haven't totally thought it through, or they're maybe further down in the organization. And if somebody at the top says, "Oh, been there, done that," I'm Christ, why did you suggest that? What you've done is not only kill that idea, but you've also killed the enthusiasm for speaking up. But many of the great ideas come from sort of what I would call laddering. Like I come up with kind of a wacko idea, and give it to you, and you say, well, that's never going to work. But if I added this, twisted this, and I did that, and then somebody else said, well, if you took that and went that, and so you may get to a point that you couldn't have gotten to, you wouldn't have gotten to if you did things same as ever, and you wouldn't have gotten there if that idea that hadn't germinated. Now, not every idea is good, but when you embolden those people that they're not going to be camped on, it isn't the vice president saying, oh, what a shitty idea or whatever, the sort of thing that is said in some of these meetings, it's kind of deflating. And you have to look at if you're that person further down the organization, does that mean my career is over? Maybe I better not speak up, or that, or I'm a little unsure of myself, and now I'm more uncertain about myself. And,
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you think like this interest that you have with universities and being connected with them, like you were just there giving classes and getting involved in this ecosystem, is part of this, wanting to be close to these young minds that are not that biased to, what they did before, but they're like more optimistic maybe? Like, how does that play in your...
Well, I mean, for sure. I teach, and I advise a couple companies, invest in a few, and consult with them. But I try to focus on the bigger companies. You can have more of an impact in theory, but the reality is when you're dealing with those smaller entities, you're dealing with those newer entities, there's a naive optimism which fuels me. I love giving back, but I also get something back. It's a little selfish, but when you're dealing with people that don't know how it can't be done, it opens your eyes to let's figure out how it can be done. And many of the students, many of the entrepreneurs, many of these early stage companies I'm involved with, that is really energizing to be around it. And it's sort of a flywheel effect, because they come in and I help them, and then it gets more, and it keeps growing as a result of it. But it's easier if you take people my age, they generally are negative because they've seen most of the screwed up way the world is. They know most of the reasons why something won't work.
Yeah.
They oftentimes new technologies are a threat to them. The AI, well, it's going to ruin the world. Somebody's going to have the nuclear code. A technology that's going to profoundly change business more than the computer ever did.
Yeah.
And because they have this prosaic negativity regarding it, they won't embrace it, or it's too difficult, or I'm not going to ride in one of those autonomous cars in San Francisco. When you're around the younger people, that almost doesn't exist, or if it does exist, it's on the fringes, not the center.
That's beautiful to hear. So you spent a couple of years at Stanford here at GSP, like in your undergrad and also in your MBA. How do you feel like it changed, like the profile of students, but also like the environment of the university? Did it change?
Well, it did change. I mean, one of the things that's changed is I went directly from undergraduate school to graduate school.
Okay.
And that's pretty unusual now.
Yeah.
Now, I have some personal reasons why I think that's happened, but it's good and bad. And the good about it is when you've had some practical knowledge, when you go back to the GSB, now you may say, listen, I have to take these 8 courses, but 2 of them don't. I can mail in my performance because I'm trying to develop my career, and those aren't the ones, but these 6 I'm going to dive down in. You don't know that when you just step out of school. So you do everything, and it's kind of like a smorgasbord, and you sort of take it.
I wish I had done like my macro classes again, like now with my age, like I would benefit so much more about this, And then, just a quick example.
So that's changed. I think that at Stanford, there's more interest in entrepreneurism now than there was. We didn't even know how to spell it when I came out of school. But I mean, it was a great step into larger companies, Hewlett Packard, companies like that, or the McKinsey's and what have you. And it was kind of an unusual path to be an entrepreneur. And I wouldn't say well set up as an MBA when you graduate from Stanford, Harvard, UC Berkeley, or whatever, but you're on a fast track. Now, the bad of it is that you get a fairly nice salary if you jump off and go into one of these large firms. Sure. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to have to probably live like you were living on the campus, living in a dorm with 2 or 3 people.
Couple noodles and
ramen is your staple meal. Yeah. But if you jump off and do that, let's say you now work and then you go and get an MBA, then you spend a couple of years fairly comfortably developing things, and perhaps you get a partner or kids or whatever. You have gossamer threads that have been wrapped around you that make it very difficult to be an entrepreneur. Because of society and what it's done for you. So, so that's kind of the bad that I see of what's happened. So while there are people that want to be entrepreneurs, they may not be able to accomplish that because it costs you a lot to get an MBA here in the schools, and that has to be paid for. Now, many people come in, their company supports them in getting that, but then you have an obligation to go back to them. But I do see more entrepreneurship, and I see more enthusiasm about it, and I certainly encourage it.
That's beautiful. So I think a lot of young people that are watching us, they might have this feeling when they hear somebody with 20 years as entrepreneur in the same company. Of course, the name of the company is the same, but the company changed a lot in 20 years, right? So you're entrepreneur of your own company a lot, but I think there's this trade-off between like focusing on one thing, and actually a lot of great things takes time, but at the same time there's this experimenting and trying new things mindset, which is also good. How do you think like young people should navigate between this focus and this more exploring on their careers?
Well, it's good if you have sort of a split mind. If on one hand you're really detailed and the other hand you're this there. Seldom is that the case.
Got it.
There's a few people. So what you do is surround yourself with some people people you respect. And the first thing I'd say is, even though most of the entrepreneurs I deal with say, there are three of us, we've been out drinking beer, we've been living together, and we've got this great idea to develop a business, and I sort of come back and say, that's a high risk strategy because all of you think alike. And which is really good for camaraderie and whatever, but when you're starting to face business, you need people with different perspective. If you're all product developers, you're going to look at things a certain way. If you're all marketers, you're going to look at something in whatever. But if you have respect for people but they have a different view, they're going to look at things in different ways to be able to develop it. And so one of the ways is then listen there. I always liked the idea, and I have a lecture which I give, that entrepreneurism is not a stage of business, it's a style of business.
Wow.
And that people think of it as a stage, we want to be entrepreneurial and then I'm going to mature and whatever. But if you think about the precepts of what makes an entrepreneur and apply that in any place in business, large or small, you're going to have, I believe, a better outcome. And in a world where the product life cycle is getting shorter and shorter, you have to be an entrepreneur on a regular basis inside the company. And many of the companies can't do that. If you look at the numbers and the statistics, there is no reason in the world that large companies shouldn't dominate every market, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, they have the financial resources, they have the human resources, they have the reach in terms of markets and whatever. And yet, time and time again, they screw it up. And the reason is that there's embedded reasons to continue on the path of things that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's the internal fights between people say, how can you steal money from me?
Politics.
Because I'm paying the rent, the reason we have the bottom line we have right now. And now you're telling me you're going to take money away from me to put it into something that's going to 80% probability of failure. And most companies kind of, divide the loaf in half. I'll give a little to you and a little there. And they don't do great by all of them. When you're an entrepreneur, you live on a razor's edge between incredible success and changing the world and failure, absolute abject failure. And that razor's edge is like on a day. Mm-hmm. You could be in the morning being one and then you're the other. True. But you have no option when you're that small.
Yeah.
Your only option is to try to succeed, where the large companies have many more options. Now the reality is most entrepreneurs don't look at the risk that they have when they found the business. They're so passionate about what they're doing, and I can tell them the statistics are or whatever, and that's dismissed. I mean, it's not there, and the reality is it's there, and they should think about it. I don't think it should paralyze them. I would hope It wouldn't paralyze them, but then they would say, okay, what do I need to augment myself? Mm-hmm. I consult with companies on a regular basis, one or two. Usually it's one I'm involved with, and maybe even on the board, but invariably, there's the same problem with every single one of those companies. I probably could think one or two it wasn't the case, but I don't even have to think. I can just go in and tell them, what you need to do? You need to do less. Because that same, as you were alluding to, that same entrepreneurial activity makes everything coming up that's new and fresh exciting. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason to go into that, and there's a reason to go into that, and a reason to go in that. And ultimately, if you want to be successful, you're going to have to really put a lot of resources, human, financial, against that best opportunity or a couple of opportunities. If you spread it over everything, it's like a laser. That's what you're trying to do. A laser doesn't have a lot of power, and if all of the jets are focused in a variety of direction, but when they all get focused in on that one point, they're incredible what they're doing. And so that's what you're doing. So I usually go in and say, what could you do less? Could you have less product? Could you, have less markets? Could you do whatever? And that's sort of antithetical to the way a lot of entrepreneurs think.
Oh yeah, that's so hard to do it. Yeah, especially when you made it like one thing right, and then you feel like super powerful, and then you feel like you can do everything right.
There was a great comment by Steve Jobs in the old day. He was kicked out of Apple. And then he went to Pixar, learned a little bit more about how to play well with others, and they invited him back in, and he had these remarkable successes. I mean, unparalleled, I would say, in terms of consumer goods and what they're doing. But he was asked, how did you know which products to focus on? Because coming up with the iPhone, coming up with apps and whatever. And he said, actually, he said there were a lot of ideas when I came in. Scully, who'd run it, had developed a huge amount of ideas. And he said, because I'm into the techie world, I thought I could choose amongst them. But what I knew overall was I couldn't pursue all of them. He said, so I probably left some things on the table that are ideas that were as good as close to what we're doing. But if we tried to pursue all of them, we would have done none of them.
I have some friends that sold their businesses after like several years running, and they have like this super strong founder fit with their company, kind of their beliefs, their values are the same, and the brand is sometimes pretty much connected with their faces. And I've seen like they kind of having this very hard time after selling the business, right? And they were too attached with the business. And I know like a lot of the core values of the North Face and yours and your lifestyle and a lot of things, they are deeply connected between that. How do you felt like when day after selling the business?
Well, I felt pretty good.
Yeah.
And it's a lengthy story, which I won't bore everybody with at this time, but maybe bore you later. But the reality was what I loved doing was creating a brand. I loved creating products. I loved going to the outdoors. I loved educating people. When we started, none of the people had business training. I hired them for passion. I believed that I could teach them business because I had an MBA. I'd run a family company for a while. I believe I could teach them that, but I could never teach passion. But I hired really bright, capable people, but brought them in. Well, 11 of those people went on to run other outdoor, either found or run outdoor companies. Started Mountain Hardware, Jack Gilbert did, Sally McCoy ran Birkenstock US, Bill Werlin ran Patagonia's international operation, and whatever. But the reality was, that was what I really was enthused about. As we grew, we were growing so rapidly that we had to fund on a regular basis. If you take the apparel business and the footwear business, at the time we were in there, it's changed a little bit now, but you could only grow 20% a year on internally generated funds. And if you grew beyond that, you're going to stress your capital. So, 1 year I'd go get bank financing, and then the banks would say, listen, you're making us into equity capital. Go get equity. And I'd go get equity, and I do that. But a sophisticated fundraising takes you about 6 months. People think they can do it shorter than that, but usually it's about 6 months. And so what I found was that 6 months of the year, I was a poorly paid investment banker. And and part of that was dealing with shareholders. You could bring new people in, but some people want to get out. You have this dream of being longer. And then you tell people, listen, if you get out, the new investor is not going to want to get in because they think you must know something. They don't know it.
Managing cap table.
Yeah, and doing all of that. And so one of the people on my board, he was one of the vice presidents of Boeing, good friend, but he said you'd always said, Hap, when it wasn't fun any longer, you were going to get out. And he said, I just raised $10 million and we're doing something, but and I felt pretty good, and I felt the ego need to kind of deploy that and see what we could do with it. But he said, think about that. And when I thought about it, I realized that for probably the wrong reasons, we probably should have tried a different business model or something. But I'd worked myself into a job that really wasn't very rewarding. And so the idea of getting out and going skiing or something made sense. Now, I've been very lucky because although there's been some transitions of people who've been involved in managing the company, they've been a pretty good steward of the brand. And periodically, they ask me to come back and talk about the DNA of the company and what it stands for.
Beautiful.
And I don't know how much that's contributed to the consistency over time, but I do believe a brand is what you stand for. It's your qualitative aspects, not your quantitative aspects. And a great brand is like coral. It grows slowly, changes imperceptibly, but at some point it is so complex and unique and so beautiful. It's unlike anything else. If you do your brand, if you have rules and guidelines, as nature puts guidelines on coral, but if you have those rules and persistently and consistently put forward, you will come up with that brand that is unique. And you never want to be the best choice. What you want to be is the only choice. And so it's what you're doing with the brand. But you can screw that up when you develop the company. But if you adhere to those basic tenets of what it is you stood for. And so I use a technique, and I use it when I'm consulting with companies now, is to try to distill down what those qualitative factors are to about 3 words. And words that apply across the entire company, apply to it, whether it's product development or whether it's financing or HR, how you deal with your people or customers or whatever.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, I mean, one is believed in quality. The 3 words had were quality, disruption, and triple bottom line. You familiar with that triple bottom line? Yeah. And then what I would do is come up with stories that were real stories that would convert that. But in terms of quality, quality related to lots of different things, but it related to product first and foremost. And so what we did was put a lifetime warranty on our product. Every financial person in the world said, Hap, you're absolutely crazy. It won't work. I can tell you that our warranty never cost us more than 1.5% of sales. And I would challenge you to come up with an advertising program that would have the same impact that did. But when we had quality like that, that told all of the vendors that were coming to us where we were positioned. And some of them said, I'm not going to deal with you. And others loved us and embraced it. It told the workers we had that were making the product, listen, that product's going to come back to you if you made it. We, I followed it all the way through. We had tags and names, and we could see where it failed, and they'd have to go make it. So they knew they were important, which was very good, but they also knew that they needed to moderate it. In terms of customers, when they'd tell us something like, your product's awfully expensive, we're saying, if it lasts a lifetime, you divide it in a number of uses, it may not be any more expensive. In fact, it's probably cheaper than something you throw away. So anyway, so we'd come up with that story. We'd tell something about that. Now, a humorous thing is that story didn't work as well as we thought it should. And we were trying to figure out why, because we were righteous about it, right? And so we dug down. The first thing is you have to have a lot of product fail to prove that you were going to do that. And we didn't have a lot of product failing. A second thing was that a lot of companies claimed to have warranties, not many that were as robust as ours. But when people went in to perfect that, let's say it's your tires, whatever, they get this, I wish you'd been here yesterday. It's an 8-month guarantee and you're in 9th month, and so you get nothing. Sorry. Or it goes down 10% a year and, whatever. And so people, even though we were righteous behind it, people were doubting us because of their experience with other consumer goods. So we finally had to come up with another story that actually showed how much we cared about the students. So the story we came up with was in our warranty department. And when you have a lifetime guarantee, you have to repair or replace it at your cost forever. Well, we had a warranty department. It had to be really rigorously managed from a budget standpoint, But they had the guideline, make the customer happy. Well, a person came in to Aisha and said, I've been planning our trip all year long, and we're going out next week, and the tent has failed. And if you can't repair the tent, our whole year's plans are gone. She said, don't worry, I'm just like you. Our whole team is like you. We love the outdoors. We want to get you out there. We'll take care of you. And the guy said, well, there is one small problem. And she said, what's the problem? I said, well, it's not your product. It's one of your competitors' products. And Aisha said, well, that's okay. They make good products. We know how to fix them. We want to take care of you. Go out there. And so then his next question is, well, what's it going to cost me? I said, we don't charge for repairs. She fixed it. They got out on their trip. They were scamming us probably, but the story was worth it we told everybody else. And of course, from our standpoint, if they told, which they would probably tell a lot of people, you can't believe what these crazy people did at North Face.
Of course.
The people they talked to would look at us in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think it's kind of obvious that brand is super important, especially in fashion. But I've seen like this trend that I'm not sure if you shared the same, but in venture capital and more like traditional technological business, for some time, brand was something you shouldn't spend some money. But I've seen like a different recent movement, maybe brand becoming more like a moat for all this crazy AI and all these hypes and this go-to-market being faster as ever, and brand actually being a very relevant moat kind of again, even in like industry like tech and software.
Yeah.
Have you saw like similar effects on this?
And it's a good observation. I'm not sure a lot of people see it that way yet. I mean, brand has been denigrated for a bit, partly because many of the companies don't really build a brand. You know, what they do is hire a graphic artist and they come up with a tagline and they
Put
think
money on ads and that's it.
and they think they've created a brand. That's not a brand.
They make like a manifesto, one video, and that's it.
But a brand properly developed is kind of an annuity for future business. And in a time such as we're facing right now, and the reason I think your observation is really spot on, a time like now, product life cycle is very short.
Okay.
And if the product life cycle is short, what do you come back to? If every time you introduce a new product, you have to develop a whole campaign, it's very difficult. And also, I as a consumer don't know, now I've got to do all this research on your new product versus I trust those guys, those gals. They know how to do it. And people often ask me, when did you know we really had it made at North Face? And it's a true story. It was kind of funny. One of the things we did is we had this lifetime warranty. So we had warranty cards. So we said, well, why don't we send a note out to them? And why don't we ask the customers, what do you like about our products? What would you like to see us make? Pretty simple. You ask them, they tell you, you make it. So I got this one card back from somebody. And the question was, what do they make and what would you like to make more of? And he said, I don't know exactly what North Face makes, but I know they make good shit.
That's the best way to
but
be
that gave,
recognized.
you can't abuse it, but that gave us the latitude to expand on those other products. And what he was saying, going back to the point that you were making, he was saying, that brand is really important to me because it underscores the trust that I have in that company to come up with it. And so you, running your company, have curated for them. You have decided what you're going to bring to the market, the quality associated with it, the efficacy of it, the ESG associated with it.
Yeah.
And they're going, I don't have time to research all of that. I don't have time to look at all of it because life's too busy and things are accelerating at this exponential rate of change. But if the brand is there, I'd probably go there for it.
Awesome. So insightful. In several of your ventures and also companies you invest and stories you share here, I can feel this impact, this activism in a way, like, and business and this impact being closer than most entrepreneurs see. Like I see a lot of people that basically have like two sides of their heads, like one where they make money and whatever they need to do to make it, and the other part is like, how do I do good, like how do I give back in a way. But seems like that you see those things more connected than average. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I could be facetious about it. I'll try not to be, but I mean the reality is companies can do good and companies should do good. And companies that are dedicated to doing good, and by doing good, I'm talking about environment, sustainability, governance, or whatever, are ones that have a longer life. My belief is, and I'm touting this right now, it's yet to be proven, my belief is that we had an era, 40 years, 50 years, I'm thinking particularly of consumer goods and others, where people were making bad decisions. not because they were inherently wrong, but they were making bad decisions, let's say with regard to plastics or with regard to human rights or whatever. They were making the decisions because there wasn't information. So the obvious thing that they could make decisions on was price and offshoring or whatever, but also then the tools developed online to do shopping price comparison. You didn't shop it on the values that were there, you shop there. But I believe that we're now in a new era. And the era that's going to win are the companies dedicated to environment, sustainability, and governance. Why do I believe that? A couple. The first one is that there's new generation that's coming up, Gen Z, and you have Alpha. These are people who really care about the planet. One, because it's a planet they're going to have to live on. You know, the thing, you know, the plastics in the ocean isn't going to go away. Climate change is here. And I don't care what the governments tell you. Climate change is here, and we see it. Ask the insurance company, they'll tell you it's there. But the reality is there's now, and not the dominant share of money yet, but it will be the dominant share. The wealth transfer is coming. And on top of that, the numbers of people in that generation is going to dwarf the number of people in the millennials and whatever, Gen X. Second with that is there now are tools that can verify the claims you're making. Greenwashing is harder to do when everybody's got a phone and the internet is omnipresent out there. So I don't care where in the world you are, you know, if there's human rights abuses going and somebody goes into the factory and takes a picture of 5-year-olds or 7-year-olds doing something, that will be around the world. And you now have very verifiable tools such as blockchain and others that do that. So you have the tools to do it, you have the demand to do that, and people looking at how they can do something. So what I see is with this sea change that's happening, the companies that use the mega trend of ESG are going to step to the fore, and the pricing issues are going to be secondary, not eliminated, but they're going to be secondary to it. So people are going to factor into the decision making. And as I said, I believe that they want to make the right decision, but they had inadequate information.
This is so inspiring. How do you see like philanthropy playing a role on this? Like, of course, like businesses being interconnected with impact themselves, but also like there's some more urgent matters that, of course, government and also like individuals and nonprofits could help. Like how do you see this in your life and the role of philanthropy?
A complex issue. I mean, at the top of it, and most entrepreneurs that are really sort of ESG focused, you know, almost disdain being large companies, right? Because large companies screw everything up. But the reality is, it's the large companies that can do the most good. If you're an entrepreneurial company that is breaking even, no matter how righteous your views are, your impact isn't very large. But if you're making, and I look at Patagonia as a great company that's doing that, if you're, you know, over $1 billion in sales and you're generating that, the money you put in your foundation, the money you put into saving things can really be impactful. So that's at the high level. I think second thing that I think with respect to it is that unfortunately, and this is a generalization, so it's probably not accurate, but many of the people who are do-gooders are people that don't actually try to change things. They just like to talk. And some people that are entrepreneurs are people who do things for good and for bad, but they are doers and they believe in action. And so I think that you need that. And I think a lot of philanthropy, if you look at the whole universe of philanthropic organizations, about 20% of them spend all their money on overhead. You know, another 60% are either marginally in large or that they are, you know, they spread themselves too thin. And then there's another 20% that's kind of focused and really does something with that. I'd like to help them. I think consulting could help them direct what they're doing more to be able to do that. But given the nature of it, many people in that 60% that are kind of there are actually well-meaning people, but they are not ones that are really ready to put up with all of the pushback and things that come because, and you look at it in the United States right now, there's pushback against climate change, there's pushback against, many of these issues. And I view it as being crazy and stupid and Luddites. But the reality is, if you're going to fight that, you're going to get people who are not going to embrace you. And if you're going to take these stance, you have to have thick skin. And again, entrepreneurs have to have thick skin.
Mm-hmm.
They have to have thick skin from day one. If they don't have it day one, they will get it while they're trying to develop it. But you have to do that. So I think philanthropy is good, but people have to realize just because it's a great idea doesn't mean that it's going to be embraced by a lot of people. It's going to be challenged by it. And you need enough resources so that all of the energy you put in, and the resources could be human, the resources could be financial, but all the energy you put in has a demonstrative impact.
Right. I'm sure like there's a lot of, entrepreneurs and businesses that come to you and ask your help. And what is the kind of stage or problems you specifically like to be involved? Like when this kind of problem or company comes to you and you're like most happy because like you can really help them.
Well, usually it's strategy.
Okay.
The strategy in terms of product, strategy in terms of geography, strategy in terms of financing, all those things. I've been through that, so I think I can help people with that. Obviously, to me, I love branding. So I like to be able to do it. And I think branding integrates because as you were talking about, I believe if your branding is around your impact and what you're doing for the world, then it integrates into your package to be able to do that. Mm. But I try to look at where I can actually have an impact versus I can do those things, and I read numbers better than anybody else, but I'm not a financial wizard. I look at it. I can generally strategically say where we're going to go, but to wind that down, not there. Frankly, I like the growth stage more, where it's not how much you take out of a company that makes it great. Maybe you limit what you spend, but it's about how you make the top line grow. There was a philosophy which I always talked about at North Face, but I called it the pizza philosophy, and that was you can either be a pie slicer or you can be a pie enlarger. And many people in business believe Malthusian thinking, that they believe the pie is finite. So what you get, you take from me, and what I get, I take from you. It develops a very abrasive, competitive world. There's other strategies, the one I embrace, which is together we can make the pie larger.
Operation.
And then there's enough for all of us. I believe it's a much more optimistic view. I believe it's one that allows you to have operating practices that are much more embracive and of others that are out there.
So it's pretty hard to have a podcast in the Bay Area and not to talk anything about AI. So I need to ask that. So in the companies you're helping and also like consulting and your students, like what is exciting you more on those days related with AI?
AI basically is making things happen faster and cheaper. And that fits very well with this accelerating pace of society out there. So there's virtually no aspect of business right now that isn't in some way going to be impacted by AI. It's just when. And if you look at it, it has the same impact and some of the same stories that computers had. When I'm old enough to know when computers first became ubiquitous, and at that time, all the arguments about how it's going to ruin the world, students could never take one into class. All of these things. It's going to displace people. Nobody's going to have jobs, and the reality is, it did displace people, but more jobs were created by that than whatever. It helped people augment their skills as opposed to just replace their skills and all that. AI is going to serve that same thing. So the first thing is ask people to look at where it might easily be introduced. And the simple thing, of course, is repetitive tasks. The ones, frankly, that don't give people a lot of psychic reward anyway. And if you can replace those, your costs are going to go down, your speed of responding to something is very good. Now, there's all sorts of projections you have. One of the things I do is a research project with my colleague who I teach with, Carlos Padello, and we've been studying for 3 years the future of education and future of work.
Wow.
And one of the elements in that is AI, how AI is going to be able to do it. People, the way we've taught before is really out the door. What we've taught, as far as back as I can study, is if you can memorize something and you can spit it out at the end of a 15-week session or whatever, and you do it better than anybody else, you get a higher grade. But that doesn't mean you remember it forever. It doesn't mean you can apply it to anything. But whatever, with AI, you don't need that. That is not a skill, because the same thing that I ask you to memorize, just go and ask Gemini or ask ChatGPT, and you're going to get it, and probably better than you would remember. So now you can pivot what you're working on to higher level issues. Now, at a very high level, I believe you can attack things that have been so large they couldn't have been looked at before. Climate change, as an example, or plastics in the ocean we talked about. You can deal with it, because one of the reasons we haven't dealt with it is there's so many variables that people haven't been able to get their arms around it. But when I look at it, everything happens faster using AI. Now there's hallucinations, and so you need to vet it, need to challenge it, and whatever, but use it to get ahead. If it cuts your time in half and you had to add 10% back to vet it, why not?
Why not?
And so I encourage or almost demand that anything I'm involved in, that you look at it that way.
Nice. So cool. We're almost in the end of this great conversation, and we always ask for, our colleagues here to say books that they're reading or books that they recommend the audience to take a look, besides your beautiful,
well, you can read my books. I've got a couple. The North Face, almost.
Yeah.
As I said, the North Face, Conquering the North Face is about successes, and you use outdoor as a metaphor. And then Almost is about a technology company that was birthed out of Stanford that could have, should have made it. It had students from Stanford, from Vanderbilt, from Cal. It had the head of the mechanical engineering department at Stanford. It had a couple of astronauts involved. It raised tens of millions of dollars, and it failed. And so the story's about that. And failure is good. But, so I would recommend reading those. But a book which I've read recently, and I'm forgetting the exact title because it's way too wordy, but it's by Salman Khan. And he runs a Khan Academy, and it's about the value of words. And they have been working with AI for the last 2.5 years. And he's come up with a model, and it's very uplifting if you read it, because what he points out is it's providing them one-to-one tutorial education. People learn at different paces, some faster, some slower. The people who are faster get bored in school. The people slower get run over by that. This can do it, and he's working with verbal AI, not just with writing. So they develop a Socratic dialogue, and they don't give the answers. What they do is help you develop the methodology approach, and that's a fantastic one. There's another book I read by David Tyerman, a friend of mine, but it's called World Famous, and it's about building a brand. And many of the ideas I have about building a brand, I never wanted to sit down and write. It was just too prosaic.
Yeah.
But he has captured how you do it, those ideas. And so it's a great book to be able to read.
Wow, I must be very happy with this comment, because coming from you, awesome. Great, so cool. Hap, before we wrap it up here and we finish, I would like you to send a message for our audience, like most entrepreneurs or people that are working with innovation, and they're trying to make the world a better place, and also they have a lot of challenges, and if you can share one message with our Brazilian audience here.
Well, there's a couple of quotes that I always hang on to, and I sort of spit out when the opportunity is there, that I think are the essence of particularly entrepreneurship. And the first one is from Voltaire. And Voltaire is a French philosopher. And His comment was very short, but it was perfect is the enemy of good. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you can't wait for perfect to happen. You have to go with an MVP. You have to eliminate some of the options that you have to get to market in time. If you wait for perfection, it's probably not going to happen. Or if it does happen, it's probably not you that's going to make it happen. The second one is from another philosopher, but a German philosopher, Goethe. And his comment is to the effect, whatever you can do or believe you can, begin it. Because boldness has genius and power and magic in it.
I feel like I need like hours to just, feel all these words. And thank you so much, Hap, for being here. And we are so thankful for your presence. And thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. So guys, that was our episode here. Thanks to our sponsor iFood and Link University and Monking for putting all this together. And it's great. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. And see you soon. Bye.